We're going to talk today about being a catalyst. I'll give a little bit of background, but before I do that, I just like to take a minute. We do this in all of our sessions because we know that we lead really busy lives. And so I just invite you to find a comfortable position with an elongated spine. This feels comfortable to you. Maybe a little gossamer thread, pulling your head up and allowing a little bit of spaciousness in your spine. And then letting the rest of your body just relax around you. Just taking a couple minutes to arrive, however that works for you. Maybe focusing in on your breath, the rise and fall of your chest. And as the thoughts arise about what happened before, or what needs to happen next, just acknowledging them and coming back to the present, coming back to the breath. Maybe just finding a little stillness settling in. And with the next few breaths, I invite you to set an intention for this call, how you want to show up, what you'd like to receive, maybe what you'd like to give to the others. And when you're ready, I invite you to open your eyes, come back to this amazing group. So my name is Shannon Lucas. I am a lifelong catalyst, I know now, but I'll tell you a little bit about my journey. I'll start with right now, I am co-CEO of a company called Catalyst Constellations, which I've been doing with my lovely business partner, Tracy Lovejoy, for the past few years. It started off as a side passion project, and I'll talk to you about how I got there. But we've moved full-time into this work this year, which was always the intention. As Nikki pointed out, I've been doing corporate innovation for a while. I've known Nikki for a good long while, almost a decade now. But I've spent my whole life really being a change agent or a catalyst, going back to being senior class president in college because I saw things that needed to change. When I was building the innovation program at Vodafone, one of the things that we knew we needed to do was focus on cultural transformation. We had a really small team of 4 people, split between European headquarters and Silicon Valley. And also just because we believed it was the right thing to do was to find the people who were already the positive troublemakers and bring them together and sort of accelerate their impact by sharing best practices, creating a structure and a framework, removing barriers, providing incentives, etc. We grew that team from a sort of a ragtag team around the world of 8 positive troublemakers to a certified innovation champion program, gamified with training and development, CEO sponsored, like the whole 9 yards, over 100 people certified worldwide. What was interesting though was even though it was a totally volunteer position and people did have to get both VP and managerial approval, not all people leaned in the same way. I had hired Tracy as a personal coach, and she helped me with a whole lot of things, thinking about my whole life. So I think that was Gabrielle. I loved how you were thinking about that. And Tracy, on the other hand, is an ethnographer researcher. She has a master's in ethnography from the University of Chicago and had been applying those skills first at Microsoft in their innovation and product design. She left to become a coach because she just loves igniting people. And as most coaches do, you have to sort of find your niche. Like, who is it that you love helping the most? And so she basically applied her ethnographic research to her client base and had interviews with the people that she loved working with. And I was one of them, and I was sort of towards the end of the research, and she had already sort of identified this term catalyst. And there's one other part to the story that I should say actually before I get there. As I was creating the innovation program at Vodafone, partly because so few people were leaning in, it was probably like 10%, 5 to 10% at any given time were leaning in hard. I decided to start collecting people like myself that I was finding as I was running innovation workshops all over the world. And so I had established a thing called the Global Intrapreneur Salon. Now I was getting to handpick these people, and my vision of this was that I would get it off the ground, but we would co-create it together. Everyone would take leadership 1 month or 1 quarter to bring some best practice or a new speaker. And the same exact thing happened. It was like 5 to 10% of the people would lean into making it happen. And I was like, I handpicked these people, like what is wrong? So fast forward to the conversation with Tracy where she started explaining what a catalyst was to me and the light went off. And I said, that explains the difference. Even within this kind of small subsection of the world that would identify as a change maker or an innovator or an entrepreneur, there's probably even the smaller subset of people that have these definite traits. I had been thinking about doing one common theme about a lot of the people that I had been working with in the Intrapreneur Salon was that we were all suffering from different forms of burnout, different stages of burnout. And so one of the next things I'd been planning to do was to sort of do an unconference on the coast of Northern California, like rent a couple awesome houses with a hot tub and some great food and some great wine, and just sort of see what came up and how we could best support each other. So as Tracy concluded the interview, I said, do you want to do that with me? And being a catalyst, she said yes. And so that was the birth of Catalyst Constellations. Now we pivoted that substantially to be I would say much more formal is probably a stretch, but having a little bit more rigor to the weekend when we first started doing our retreats. So let's talk a little bit about what it means to be a catalyst. So like the classical definition is a person or thing or an event that causes a quick change or action. And we would say that it's change makers with an unstoppable drive to action, brimming with ideas to make the world a better place. And there are synonyms here: disruptor, change maker, problem solver, troublemaker. I mean, the list is long. Entrepreneur, innovator. Those are the titles that people have historically sort of either been called by people, which aren't always positive, like disruptor, or that we wear as badge of honors, like disruptor, because we're going to take it on ourselves. So the context really is, if there's this broader group of change agents, then the research, which Tracy applied over the course of the past few years, is that there is a subsection of these change agents that we call catalysts. There's essentially 6 attributes that define a catalyst from the broader change agent population. And we call them sort of like the visionary doers, because there's a strong combination of the vision and the action. We piece together information really quickly, and we will source that information from myriad sources. It could be a play, it could be an article that we read in a magazine, it could be a conference that we went to, art installation. Like, we will look everywhere to see what is emerging. And from all of that sensing, really, we come up with many ideas and lots of possibilities. So we're the people who will be standing in line at Starbucks trying to figure out how to optimize the system, even though it has nothing to do with us, because we're always seeing ways that things can be better. And from all of that, we create visions. We'll talk about this more. We will see the vision very clearly sometimes, but we're not always great about initially being able to communicate that vision to others. And this is the important part, and you'll see connecting this back to my story, this drive for action that transforms. So for a catalyst, it's almost a physical need, a spiritual need to see that thing birthed in the world. It is not enough to just have the thought and pass it on to somebody. That doesn't mean that we stay all the way to market entry. We often don't, but we will go far enough to make sure that that thing has enough momentum to sort of manifest. The data is out about whether people are born or made early as catalysts, but one thing that's really interesting is that we almost all have this experimentation mindset. So when catalysts bump up against things like design thinking or the scientific method or lean startup, these modalities we find with a sense of relief. There's like, oh, there's someone who describes how I operate in the world. And from that, we can bring some intentionality and perfect how we operate in the world, but it feels really good to be seen. And finally, and this is more from an external perception, but we're intuitive and perceived as being comfortable with risk and ambiguity. The intuitive part is interesting because we're often very strong networkers, and even though some people wouldn't own having a high emotional intelligence and might not have it in all contexts, we're very good at sensing at what's going on in the room, the dynamics. And the sort of comfort with risk and ambiguity, a lot of catalysts wouldn't necessarily say that they, are sort of adrenaline junkies or risk junkies. For us, often we have the data. We have sourced so many pieces of data from so many disparate sources that it doesn't feel risky or ambiguous to us. Now, our organizations may come back and ask for another McKinsey report, which makes us want to stab our eyes out because we're like, how much more data do you need? Like, we've done all of the sourcing and we know where this is headed. But that's sort of the differentiation. So some of us are very comfortable with risk. And this is sort of, we think that there's a scale of sort of Tracy's a more conservative catalyst based on her research methodologies, where she is in her life, how she was born, her personality. Anyone who meets me knows that I'm a hyper catalyst. I catalyze across my life. I move way too fast. I leave way too many people behind. So there is sort of a continuum here of catalysts. So we just have some questions for you to see if this feels like something that might be resonant with you. And you can just answer these quietly to yourself. Do I feel driven to do things that make the world around me better? Do I frequently piece together information quickly and see that path to action? Do I sometimes overwhelm people around me with all the ideas that I have? Do I sometimes overwhelm myself with all the ideas I have? Do I often challenge the status quo or get referred to as disruptive? When tackling a challenge, do I try different approaches to figure out which is the most effective as I go? And does the term catalyst feel like it fits? If you answered yes to all these, you're definitely a catalyst. And I'll just stop for a minute and see if you guys have any questions, how that felt. Feel free to chat in the chat box.
And you all have to unmute yourself. I muted you in the beginning. So you can go to the main window and press the space button, which will temporarily unmute you. Marcus, are you a catalyst?
Yeah, I think so.
Gabriele, are you a catalyst?
I guess no. Some points they do fit, but when it comes to be quickly and fast, then I have to confess I don't think that I meet these points.
So you don't have to meet all the points on the list. And like I said, Tracy is much more considered than I am. So just to provide some context, that's why we talk about the continuum. The speed for the catalyst is probably one of the most variable things.
Do you see this as a weakness or a strength, Gabriele?
Well, that's my life.
Do you perceive yourself as a perfectionist?
Maybe sometimes, yeah. No, actually, no.
Okay. Cool.
But the first sentence, that's very much what I think fits with me.
Mm-hmm. Any other thoughts or comments about it before I move on?
Move on, and I'll randomly pinpoint people.
Right.
So to cut the
great.
Awkward silence of.
No worries. So have you guys talked at all about volatility, about VUCA? I'll introduce this. So there's this concept that came out of the US military in the early 80s called VUCA, which is volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. It came, as you probably know, the US military has a big budget for research, and they were trying to understand the post-Cold War complex and the accelerating pace of change. Now, this is the early 80s before the internet really became a thing. So you can imagine that these traits that they articulated to try and grapple with the uncertainty and the pace of change have only become even more relevant. And a lot of people, particularly in business strategy or compliance and risk mitigation, have been paying attention to this for a while. I've been talking about it for a long time, and I don't think it's gotten the attraction or the attention that it's needed up until recently, because obviously with the global pandemic and sort of an economic collapse, it's never been more true that we're living in a volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous world. Now, interestingly, in the late 1990s, the founder of the Institute for the Future, his name is Bob Johansen, came up with a response to this. Like, if this is the challenge, how do we respond to it? And he came up with a concept called VUCA Prime. which is we need vision, we need understanding, we need to get to clarity, and we need to have agility in order to be able to respond. And these become competitive differentiators for organizations who first willingly acknowledge that we live in a VUCA world, and then try and cultivate these attributes within their organizations. Our contention, based on the data, is that catalysts are literally born VUCA ready. You'll see the strong correlation between the 6 attributes that I mentioned earlier. So the vision and understanding, so we'll sense all of the things, we'll start to pull together what that context is, what that means, we'll create a vision, we'll refine that in multiple iterations because we have an experimentation mindset, which provides deeper clarity and also usually deeper engagement, which is important, and agility, which again doesn't mean speed necessarily, it just means being able to adapt and be responsive to a particular situation, although there often is a speed component. But what's interesting that sort of Bob Johansson's definition missed, which is an important attribute of Catalyst, is we combine this with action. So it's not enough just to have all of these traits. We use these traits to actually transform organizations or the world around us. We did sort of a research into how most of the thought leaders in HBR and Forbes and Inc. and everything were describing for leaders the traits that they were going to have to cultivate in their leadership teams and across the organization. And this is what they came up with. We also had done a survey separately, not connecting it at all with VUCA, but with the Catalyst community. We asked them, how do you articulate what your superpowers or strengths are? And this is what they said. And it's literally almost a 1-for-1 in terms of how Catalysts identify what their superpowers are and what the sort of VUCA thought leaders are saying executives need to be looking for. So you'll see sense making, connecting the dots. That's a quote. And the Catalysts are like, I connect dots. Situational awareness, having that high EQ and being intuitive, as we talked about. Metacognition, like having a sense of who I am and where I am in this context. And the Catalysts bring self-awareness. Unsurprisingly, some of the more traditional things in terms of focus on innovation, a lot of Catalysts end up in design thinking innovation roles for obvious reasons. But you'll see it's, like I said, it's almost a 1-for-1. Now, there are certain challenges that Catalysts face in different organizations, and they start with a long list. So we're not perfect. I appreciate the not wanting to focus on the negatives, but this is sort of the lived experience of what it means to be a catalyst. We can have difficulty staying interested in getting things across the finish line. We can get pretty frustrated when we're certain that we're right and then be perceived as arrogant. It's like, we have all of the data, what more do you need? And they're asking for another McKinsey report, which can make us impatient and frustrating for others. We can have trouble bringing people along because of our speed and sometimes our lack of clarity. We have so many ideas, it can be difficult to prioritize. We can be sort of feared and liked and misunderstood, and all of this ends up creating self-doubt and loneliness. Self-doubt because we are usually by definition ahead of the curve, and loneliness because it's not easy being there. Catalysts often describe doing the energetic lift of creating transformation or cultural change in organizations, which has a toll. The consequences of all of this then are burnout. As I mentioned, I was already seeing that in the community that I had been cultivating, isolation for the reasons we just discussed. And one of the consequences is also lack of clarity, because we have so many ideas, and sometimes because people can't keep up with us, we don't have great sounding boards for how to process the things that we're coming to vision on. The data suggests that there is a pretty sort of normal energetic journey that catalysts go through. And this is the sort of unself-aware catalyst who hasn't come into contact with the data. This is our lived experience until we recognize it and can start to make changes. Catalysts thrive on tackling wicked, big, juicy problems. So the second that we are invited, and sometimes even when we're not invited, to figure out the next thing that needs to exist in the world, we get into the sense of mania. We're like, oh, more articles I want to read, more people I want to talk to. I just want to get all of the information and start synthesizing what it is that needs to happen next. During this process, we are getting, this is, you think about this, this is an energy curve. We are getting insane energy. This is our sweet spot. It's like a feeling of ecstasy almost. We hit this incline that starts to plateau a little bit as the things are coalescing. So getting to that clarity for us, it's still an energetic uplift, but it's not that crazy, I'm diving deep into that first, experimentation into that wicked problem. During those first steps, those could be days, weeks, months, even years for some people, we generally are getting so much energy out of this, and it's such a state of mania that we let go some of our normal sustaining routines. So we'll give up on sleep, we'll work more hours during the week, we won't go see our friends, we might stop going to the gym, like all of the things that would be normal sustaining routine, we're like, we don't need it, we're getting so much energy from what we're working, just one more hour, just one more hour. At some point, as we're implementing the vision that we want to create in the world, our normal routine has now been disrupted, and we bump up against that as we're starting to orchestrate the change. Orchestration, by our definition, is how you are getting all of the different, it's just like it sounds like, how you're getting all of the different players and stakeholders that need to be involved in the process. So in an organizational context, that would be sort of your organizational stakeholders. If you're building a startup, that would be, your customers, your investors, legal, all of that stuff, the people who are going to actually implement and make things happen along with you. This is not a place of great energy giving to us. It's not that bad. The better that we are at it, the more sort of a plateau it is, but we don't love it. We don't love dotting the I's and crossing the T's as a general rule. And the further that we get into this orchestration phase, the more likely we are to hit resistance. This is sort of definitional. There's many, many books that talk about change management and resistance to change and how people feel about it. This is to be expected. What happens though is that people often start by attacking the idea and often end up attacking the change agent or catalyst who brought you the idea. And we are so inextricably linked, almost like I said, on a physical or spiritual level with that thing that we're creating with the world, that if it's pointed at the idea, we can internalize it. But of course, if it's pointed at us, it can be catastrophic. And we can become the lightning rod actually for the resistance in the organization, which understandably can lead to trauma. Not every catalyst experiences trauma, and not every catalyst through every sort of new venture experiences trauma, but it is significantly, statistically significant in the data that we see. And all of this, of course, ultimately leads to burnout. So the question is, what do we do about it? Well, first we need to start off with our own understanding and self-awareness about our process. So we call this the Catalyst formula. It's pretty much like design thinking, lean startup, etc. You have a vision that you've distilled, you move into action to try and test some hypothesis that's part of the vision. You pause, you reflect, you take the data, the actionable data, you iterate potentially on what the hypothesis is, you crystallize the vision, and you go through this several times. What makes Catalyst successful, if that's our innate thing without any self-awareness, what makes us successful is first bringing our unconscious competencies to consciousness. So just understanding that this is who we are and how we work. And then we spend a lot of time working with Catalyst on bringing skills like rejuvenation, compassion for self and for others, because we are not always easy to work with, empathy for those in our community, and often sometimes our significant others or our family. And importantly, community. So Catalyst connecting with other Catalysts is often a bright spot, if not transformational, in their lives. Okay, so before I go on to any more, I just wanted to pause and see if there were any questions. All good?
V, what do you think about it? Are you Catalyst?
Yes, definitely. I mean, when you were describing sort of the traits of Catalyst, I was going, yes, 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 this is absolutely me. So yeah.
And have you experienced that energy curve, V?
Definitely, sometimes, like, especially during university, there have been times where I'm like, I'm just enjoying working on this so much. So I've pulled in like a lot of all-nighters, so yeah.
I feel the same. I sometimes feel like this energy curve, I have 10 of them a day.
Well, it's really interesting. So I'll talk about the book that we're writing, but one of the gentlemen that we interviewed for the book had this amazing epiphany, and we ended up sort of diagramming it, is often catalysts don't have just one idea that they're working on. And so you can imagine hyperimposing, you know, 3 of those journeys at the same time. It creates this really weird dissonance sometimes in our energy levels, because we'd be really high about one project at the beginning of the day and kind of burn down on another one at the end of the next day or something. So it is something that we talk about.
Yeah, and like, you know, I used to struggle with like having a lot of ideas and just being spread too thin. And
Yeah.
I've found a routine that works for me.
Nice.
Is if I get an idea, I just write the idea down, sort of let it go in the back, don't do any research on it till I've completed what I have right now, and then I go and look into that.
That's exactly, so I'll tell you a little bit about some of the ways that we support Catalyst, but that's one of the big ways that we do it. So making sure that you have a priority list. And what we encourage people to do is have a priority list for the actual project that you're working on now. Like I always had a whiteboard in my office so my team could see what my priorities were. But we also talk about having phantom goals, which are all of those projects or ideas that we know that we can't get to right now. And if we don't write them down and acknowledge them and say, I might get to you someday soon, but I'm not going to get to you right now, we can beat ourselves up because we're not making progress on those ideas too. And it can feel really discouraging. The other thing that we encourage Catalyst to do on their priority list of the things that they're working on now is to put themselves on the list. So I usually had somewhere between 5 and 8 things that I would be working on a meta level for my team. And I always had one thing that was like spending time with family or vacation or, you know, something that was speaking to, I was putting myself on the list as well.
Interestingly, I found that I am having to slow my expectations down. I mean, I'm working on I have multiple projects on at any time, obviously. And occasionally people come to me and say, hey, look, Marcus, have you got any chance of trying to find out a way through this one? And I can see it so clearly. And I realize I'm going to scare the shit out of the people who come along and ask me, because I'm going to go at like 300 miles an hour. Sorry, 400 kilometers an hour, 450 kilometers an hour, as we're in Europe, and scare the shit out of them. So
Yeah.
I've started having to hold myself back, which pisses me off.
Yeah.
Because I get less pissed off by holding myself back than finding that I can start and I get all energized, and then they piss me off by thinking I'm some sort of crazy guy. It's
Very familiar with all of those feelings. Yes. And this is why Catalyst, connecting with other Catalysts, is so transformative. It's funny because I was delivering a corporate engagement with some other partners that I partner with now and again. And it was like, I had to go back to Tracy, my business partner and co-CEO. And I said, you know that I love working with you. I mean, we have the best days all the time. But I said, the reminder of what it is like to work with non-Catalyst versus a catalytic partner who's like there with me every step of the way. It's just this incredible breath of fresh air. It's interesting self-awareness that you are choosing, like which parts do you share? When do you share them? What kind of fallout are you willing to deal with at any particular time? Yeah.
Yeah, it's annoying.
Well, I have a question too. Is it this curve what you showed, is this not always the same also with people, they just dedicated or goal-oriented people?
Sorry, I didn't understand the question. Can you repeat that?
Yes, the curve of what we saw before.
Yeah, yeah.
Is this a curve for people, they actually dedicated for something, the goal-oriented people? It's not for all the people the same curve? It's not a special journey?
No, it's not. And so Tracy's done the data on this. I would say that there's probably similar curves, but not everyone experiences the same level of mania and the same rapidity, the same repetition of burnout. So sure, there's some overlap with sort of type A or high potential people. Our next waves of research are actually going to look at mapping. We think there's strong correlation between multi-potential or high potential people that are identified in organizations, people with ADHD. There's a group of people called highly sensitive people. And so there's overlaps of all of these these particular things. Most people don't love, you know, living in the world of, you know, sharing, developing the vision and looking at the ideas. I forget the name, I forget the name of the gentleman who was just speaking from the UK, I believe, but that's not it's not the same pleasure point that it is for other people. And this is an interesting, there's an interesting sort of sociological study that could be done in organizations. Some people just like being in their swim lane and being told what to do, honestly. And so for them, this like high mania curve of exploration would be uncomfortable. Certainly burnout does not only occur in the Catalyst community, and we are not making that contention. We are interested in, again, doing another piece of research on potentially what the percentages are of a general population versus the Catalyst population of burnout. I hope that helps answer the question.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
So I'll keep going because we've got some more content to get through. So to support Catalyst, we've created what's called the Catalyst Foundry. It's an 8-week online experiential class. We spend 90 minutes together each week in live instruction, and then on Fridays, there's an optional office hours. And the focus here is helping Catalyst sort of accelerate their change and achieve their vision while creating more sustainable ways for them to work, so not losing themselves completely as they're manifesting that change. We're launching our 3rd class tomorrow, and then we'll be launching another class starting in October. And to the point made earlier, it's great. I mean, I'll show you the content. We think the content's great, and we get a lot of great feedback on the content, but really what people resonate with is just having this deep community of catalysts who are going through kind of like the same self-awareness and skill development, but at a speed and sort of depth of personal understanding that the rest of the cohort are. So to that point, we sort of double click down on what it means to be a catalyst personally. We talk about the visioning process. So just because we're sort of natural born vision creators does not mean we're great at creating them in a way that others can understand. And what often happens, and I am super guilty of this, is I will have a vision on Monday, I'll set my team to go work on it. By Friday, I've gone through 4 iterations and forgotten to tell them. And so by the time they come back to me on Friday, I'm like, that wasn't what we talked about. And they're like, yeah, it was. And I'm like, okay, right. I didn't bring you along the next 3 versions of the vision. Action and iteration. So how do we, you know, create the experiments that we need to and iterate on them without losing people in the process? This can be a big swirl for us, and this can be where we really lose people. They might be clear on the vision, but we've iterated so many times that we've lost them again. So how do we do that meaningfully and slow that down? We spend an entire week on rejuvenation because this is so important for Catalyst. We often have to talk about the fact that like a burnt out catalyst creates no change at all, because catalysts often won't take a break for themselves because they're so passionate about the thing that they're creating in the world. They feel like if they take a weekend away or an hour away from the desk, that they'll be, you know, doing a disservice to the thing that they're trying to create. So if we can help catalysts make the connection that they are more than just like walking change vehicles and they deserve some rejuvenation too, it can have a profound effect. I mentioned orchestration. It's one of those sort of neutral energetic things for most catalysts. We spend 2 weeks on this because this is where we can help catalysts, again, bring intentionality and process to how they're getting all of the stakeholders on board so that they can, as soon as possible, sort of have the handover. Most catalysts recognize, I know I'm successful when someone else in the organization is talking about my idea back to me that those were the words that I wasn't allowed to say 18 months ago, and now it's sort of been normalized in the organization. That's success. So how do we, and the organization has sort of taken it on and they're going to start the actual implementation. How do we get to that as quickly and effectively as possible so the vision that you have can be successfully implemented? We do talk a lot about values and confidence, and there was another point that you sort of brought up earlier. We actually talk about financial freedom for catalysts too. We're not financial advisors, but we talk about the importance of this because if you are beholden to the paycheck, it becomes really risky to be able to speak your mind in your organization, especially if there's not enough psychological safety. So how at different points in your life can you set yourself up for success? Because you were saying earlier, like if you have to shut your mouth and not share your opinions, it can be this crazy emotional weight. I mean, it can actually sort of accelerate burnout because you're not living sort of fully aligned. And then finally, everyone leaves there then with sort of their ongoing Catalyst game plan, their action plan for how they can continue. We also do one-on-one peer sessions. And then, as I mentioned, office hours, so people can come and take these principles and ask questions about how to apply them to their specific initiatives. The course is offered with our online Catalyst Galaxy, which is our global community network of catalysts from all over the world. These are some of the logos. There's a lot of companies there, Ford, Accenture, et cetera. Every month we have a theme. So this month is mindfulness and self-awareness. Last month was connection. So we'll host a monthly talk on this. We'll have conversations online. We'll highlight a Catalyst member who's excels at embodying whatever topic that we're talking about. So it's a great way of speed networking. It's a great way to meet other Catalysts from around the world and a safe place to move at speed and share ideas. And finally, and Nikki, I don't think you've seen this yet. This is the book that's coming out in October. So we
wow, amazing.
We're releasing a book that we wrote this year, Move Fast, Break Shit, Burn Out, the Catalyst Guide to Working Well. So we'll keep you posted about that. And with that, I'm at an end.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
Yeah, any other questions? Feedback?
Yeah, right. How do you feel about being a catalyst?
Yeah, I have seen already the questions. I can every question answer with yes from my perspective. What I see is a little bit different as I work in a bigger company. Is how is the environment? So that's what is the surrounding around you? So are the people prepared to discuss this open-mindedness? So there is a lot of discussion ongoing, especially when you came from a traditional company. So there is a huge mind shift to go. And yeah, I think that the speed is what challenges is the most challenging in our environment. So we see that we are, let's say, a tanker, and we need speedboats. So that's
yeah. I use that metaphor at every company that I've been at in the last 10 years. So I'm familiar with the experience.
Yeah.
So we actually help companies identify and set up catalyst networks in between, and that's part of the research about them also being high potentials. Because if companies are thinking about talent attraction and retention and investment, the link is strong there. The thing that I would say about the speed, and this is what we help people with in the Foundry, is the disconnect comes, and like I said, I'm a living example of this, is of us not being able to slow down just enough to get the next early adopters. So if you think of a normal distribution of change acceptance, like we will be on the top 1 to 10%. And it's how do we, you know, and so I would curate my teams this way. How do we get sort of the next wave of maybe not total mavericks, but early adopters on board, slowing down just enough so that you can start to get the critical mass throughout the organization. So those are some of the tips and tricks that we talk about in the Foundry, because we can get frustrated, and I personally can be very arrogant about like, why can't you see it? Why can't you move at speed, blah, blah. But it really is unfortunately on us if we want to manifest that thing in the world to help the organization see the vision and get them on board successfully.
But
Shannon, I have a question for you. There is a saying that you become the average of the 5 people you surround yourself with. How many catalysts should a catalyst have around them? Or how many catalysts should a non-catalyst have around them?
Well, I love that saying. I totally live by it. I think it's a fantastic saying. There isn't a number there. But what I was going to say actually earlier to Marcus's point too is what we recommend is doing project-specific network maps in organizations are great, or just having sort of your own network map that you build out about who your safe space, you know, the people that you can go to who are hopefully catalysts, because we need them to be able to share some of those ideas, and they'll create a safe space. So as an example, Tracy and I sat down and did our strategy in January of this year, And we built out a map of who we were going to take, just our, the PowerPoints were shitty. We didn't design them. They weren't fully formed ideas, but we weren't going to go too far until we had sort of gotten feedback from other catalysts. And so we mapped out in our network, and we actually had like 4 waves. And the first wave was people that we could go to and say, look, this is my baby. My baby may be ugly, but if you tell me my baby's ugly in a not nice way, it's going to be really hard for me to hear. So I want your feedback, but please hold space and understand where I am in the process. So I think it's important for catalysts to have that level of awareness depending on sort of what it is they're trying to do. That being said, having non-catalysts, or if I'm a hyper catalyst, having maybe not hyper catalysts around you is also important, because moving at speed and not being able to translate to the organization will set you up for failure. So I often think about getting sort of catalyst translators who could be those early adopters who will get the idea reasonably soon and then help me with the rest of the organization.
Indra, we spoke about traits, about the skills a human should have to understand the exponential patterns, the exponential future. How do you feel about the catalyst idea? How much do you feel like you are a catalyst, you have catalysts around you?
I think at some points I am a catalyst, but not in all the cases. I think I miss some catalysts in my environment. Sometimes I feel, alone in my surrounding. And maybe sometimes these catalyst things I don't accept because I don't understand what it is. And I have a lot of ideas and mixed all of it, and then sometimes I'm lost in them. So I think from this point, I need to redesign my thinking and just accept it.
Nice. Jeffrey, if you're still there.
Yes, I'm still here. Sorry. Yes, I think I'm a catalyst. I'm a kind of a messy catalyst, and I don't have all of the communication skills that you've mentioned, but in terms of the ideas and trying to manage all the ideas and get them across to people, yes, I feel like I fit there. Yeah.
This is your battery telling you that you're off in a second?
Yeah.
Jeffrey, that totally resonates with us, though. We are sometimes the worst communicators about the things that we are so passionate about. We actually sort of put a pause on some of the initiatives that we had that came out of our strategy session, because when we went around to those people, they just weren't landing right. So one of the big things we did was hire a brand strategist this year who's helping us sort of consolidate and communicate and get concise, because we can get so excited and we're sometimes too close to it. And that often happens with catalysts, right? It's like we've been living the thing for so long and synthesizing so much information that clarity and communication can be a challenge for us.
Right.
Well, I have a question. What do you know about the motivation of catalysts?
It's intrinsic. The motivation for catalysts is definitely intrinsic, which is one of the reasons why when you're setting up innovation, championing communities and things like that, then incentives are different often for catalysts. Now, they're not completely different. And so I'm a big advocate for catalysts getting paid what they should get paid, because often catalysts are so passion driven and or purpose driven that they will work 120% compared with other people because they're just so happy to get to work on their idea. And so I'm like, hey, time out, you're having massive impact on the organization. Make sure that you get the recognition and rewards. And I counsel them that for 2 reasons. 1, because they should get paid what they're worth, but 2, because the currency of value in organizations is generally money. And so if they want to be taken seriously, or they want their program to be taken seriously, that's one way of doing it. Now, Tracy's funny because while what I just said is true, and intrinsic motivation is the biggest by far driver for catalysts, as we were writing the book, we had a back and forth about incentives, because she's like, well, we don't do it for the ego or the whatever. And it's like, Tracy, you love a gold star. Like, she loves getting hey, I did all my homework. I did this. I blah, blah, blah. I was like, you love recognition. Like, what human doesn't love recognition? So the primary driver for Catalyst is to see their thing being birthed in the world, but we need to intentionally, and often because there's a link with high potential people, make sure that we're cultivating and curating and supporting them in the right way. The best thing that you can do for a Catalyst first and foremost is give them a psychologically safe environment, because they are the ones with the divergent opinion, and they will thrive when they find a boss that allows them to bring the divergent thinking and explore it in a positive way. What we find is Catalysts will follow that boss from role to role, to company, because so few people get them. So if you ask a Catalyst what the most important thing to them is, it's being able to sort of achieve the visions that they have in the world, given that latitude.
Do you think that a Catalyst is operating in their comfort zone, or completely every day out of their comfort zone?
And that's an interesting question, right? Because sort of by definition, so we have a thing that we talk about in the book called the imposter syndrome, because by definition, and again, it depends on where you are in the hypercatalyst curve, but by definition, we're doing things net new. And this is where it's different from like traditional innovation roles, because you can be in operations, you can be in supply chain, you don't need to be in innovation to be catalyzing change, right? But by definition, because we're always like taking that plunge, that's where the risk comes in. We're taking that plunge into something new. We can be outside of our comfort zone, and the imposter syndrome is loud, which is why having a boss who gets you and supports you, and you create this safe container to do that exploration with, can be the transformative thing for Catalysts. The flip side is, if you look at a Catalyst resume, you can almost always spot them. This isn't entirely true. Like, their average tenure is less than 5 years. Let's just say it that way, because once we develop something to the point where it's comfortable, it feels rote and routine and boring, and we want to poke our eyes out again, like we're ready for the next challenge. So you'll see people move from role to role, from discipline to discipline. We find people with T-shaped careers often. They have a depth of experience that they got when they were earlier in their career, and then they've applied that in a bunch of startup to corporate to public service.
Do you have a differentiation to innovators?
A differentiation for what?
From Catalyst and an innovator?
A catalyst and an innovator. Well, there hasn't really, the interesting thing is I just finished a huge lit review for a customer of ours. And there are books out there like The Innovator's DNA, but there's not a lot of sort of ethnographic studies about common traits for innovators. Obviously, there's a huge overlap, which is why we start off with that chart. And it's probably more like a Venn diagram of change agent, intrapreneur, innovator, entrepreneur. But the thing that in personal experience that made the biggest difference is there's a lot of people who innovate and they come up with the ideas, but they don't have the same drive to like get it through at all costs to a point of sort of personal detriment. So it's not like it's always a badge of honor that you're a catalyst, because it can come with some really very real personal costs. But we often also, just for the sake of expediency, use them interchangeably. I mean, do you create a catalyst program in an organization or an innovation champion program? Like, being overly prescriptive about that isn't super helpful, but the difference for me would be that I would be evaluating people based on these defined personal traits as opposed to like skill sets or experience that most innovators get sort of selected on.
Shannon, thank you so much. I feel like so I go like yes, and with all the ups and downsides that you're listing and mentioning, I was like yeah, guilty.
You're a hyper catalyst, Nikki. There's no doubt about it. Come on. Well, I hope you guys have a great week. Feel free to stay connected to the. You can go to galaxy.catalystconstellations.com. It's free to join right now. We'll be switching that soon, so it's a good time to join, and we'll be grandfathering people in, and you can just sort of join and see if it's your people and come to some free office hours or speed networking.
Sounds amazing. Thank you so much.
guys. Have a great
Have
evening.
a great week
Thank
ahead.
you.
Thank you for the offer.
Good to see you.
Thank
Bye.